Okay, before you watch this, there's about three things I think you should know. First of all, this is a chronology of musical influences on me from the time I was very young until my early 20s and my career started. Second of all, this is an unabashed advocacy for classical music. Most people in my circle right now don't seem to talk about it, don't listen to it. You don't walk into their kitchen and hear it playing on the radio. It's a very powerful presence in my life, and so I kind of want to bring it out of the closet or wherever it's hiding and talk about it and do a little shake some pom-poms for it, because I really love this stuff. It's powerful stuff. And thirdly, my practice in making this movie was to do it completely by myself, but I needed some machines to help me, and so I can get some motion in some of my shots, or get the lights to move, or get the camera to focus and unfocus based on these little motorized gizmos that I've cooked up. Some of them have names and I talk to them. They haven't started talking back to me yet, but who knows, this could happen. So I want you to see those. I'll show you those during the course of the movie. So, Maestro, downbeat. Once when I was about 15, I guess, I was just hanging around the house one afternoon, and I was walking down the front hall, heading towards the living room for some reason, and I heard this piece, and I just sat on a chair and listened, and it was like a light came on. For me, it always seems to be the slow movements of classical music and other kinds of music that really draws me in somehow. It's the poetry and the poignancy that gets to me. My development into becoming a career musician at age 22 was kind of a slow movement in and of itself. And I'd like to talk about some of the experiences that led to me following that path. Once again, when I was about 15, somebody had put this record on, and I think it was an epiphany, and I think epiphanies are when the last piece of a puzzle that you didn't know you were putting together falls into place, and the whole puzzle emerges and becomes visible. At that moment, I contracted the virus, the classical music virus, the slow, rich, harmonic, emotive, spiritual virus, and it's never let me go. There is no cure. I should probably tell you who I am. I'm Dave. My last name is pronounced Piquel, and if you want to know, what I've done with my musical life, you can always look me up on Google. But just to make it brief, I'm a Canadian pop musician based in Vancouver, mostly known for songwriting and also for record production, and a lot of work as a session player back in the 1970s and 80s, mostly the 80s. I've traveled around, I've written commercials, I've met some superstars. One of my friends recently, I think she was trying to get me to go to something, where there were going to be 6 guitar players, and I just kind of went, I'd rather be cut in half by a rusty chainsaw than go to that. And she said, well, you just don't like music. And I thought, there's an element of truth in that. But the truth is much deeper for me, and that is that what got me into music in the first place was the was not like Paul Revere and the Raiders and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin, even though, that's cool. And I played guitar in my little rock band in grade 8 and stuff. But it was the beauty of classical music, which was kind of present in my house growing up, but I didn't really click into it until, like I said, until this kind of incident, which I remember very clearly, like zing and wow. And then in the following weeks, look at all these records. There's Brahms, there's, Beethoven. Oddly, I was drawn to music written between, say, 1820 and 1920. Very specific. It's harmonic, it's expressive, it can be complex, but not for the sake of complexity. And I literally know virtually no one in my life right now who relates to this stuff, who likes it, who digs it. Where my heart really beats is in this stuff, Sibelius and Rimsky-Korsakov, Rachmaninoff, Ravel. And so I just wanted to tell a little story about kind of how I turned into the kind of musician that I turned into, and see if, maybe through all this work I could explain to my friend what it is really with me and music. No, I do not hate music. That's far, far, far from being the truth. I think I used to listen to records a lot as a child. Somewhere around the age of maybe 4, I gravitated towards this one particular record, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto. I just loved it, and I probably asked for them to put it on over and over and over. Yes, finally one day the Hamilton Symphony Orchestra had it on the program, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, played by somebody, I don't know. So my parents bought me a ticket, and off we went, and somewhere in the middle of the slow movement I fell asleep. Hey, it was way past my bedtime. I feel there's this childlike innocence in Mendelssohn's music. It definitely made a connection with little 4-year-old Dave, and there's this 19th century conception that might even prevail today, that classical music has to take you to the top of the mountain all the time, like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And although Mendelssohn won't necessarily take you to the top of the mountain, he will take you to an absolutely gorgeous field about a third of the way up, where there's a playground and where you can enjoy the heck out of yourself and your friends while watching the strivers grinding their way to the apex. I was always really sensitive to music, that's for sure. As a preschooler in Ontario, we used to go up to Granny's house every weekend. She lived out in the country, and unlike us, she had a TV, and so I loved watching it. One evening, I guess we're watching Pinocchio, and out comes this little cricket character in a top hat, and he starts singing this song, When You Wish Upon a Star. And I think I got through like 4 lines of it and just broke down, bawling my eyes out, and inconsolable. People were gathering around saying, what, did you get bit by a wasp, or, what's going on? And I just, over and over, I remember saying, it's so sad, it's so sad. And they completely didn't understand. Why would they, And thinking back about what was getting to me, I wonder if it might have been just the beauty of the song, the whole gestalt, the voice, the chord progression, and but yeah, even today when I think about that song, or I think about that moment, I get a little something, right here. It's just one of those things. There's certain types of musical experiences that, I can't resist, kind of a little mini breakdown. One of those is, oddly enough, it's like contralto or soprano singing, in the classical mold. Something, with purity, perhaps Mozart. It doesn't have to be in a minor key. It can be, something very, very happy little waltz, or a song about a country maiden who meets her swain. It does not have to be sad. But when that certain note arrives, so do my tears. It's just maybe I'm just strange. I think there is that possibility. For me, harmony's always been the most effective way for music to make its way into my heartland. When I was a little guy, I used to look for echoey places where I could sing 3 notes in quick succession, like bum, bum, bum. And I'd hear the echo lasting, and it would form this little chord. In the later grades of Royal Conservatory Piano, which I took all the way through to my degree, you need to take theory courses, and one of those is harmony. And I had a very good teacher in the late grades of harmony, and so the last harmony exam I took with my buddies Roger and Harold, and after we got our marks, they were really good, and I was told the conservatory exam board had called our teacher ostensibly to compliment her on producing such well-educated students. However, the story came out later that what they were really doing was investigating us for cheating, because they had never had 3 students from one teacher get marks that were that consistently high. Bum bum bum, bum bum bum. Bum, bum, bum. That was a good one. My early recollections of classical music were not universally pleasant. One thing that used to happen at our house, Dad would have a few people over and he'd want to play them records on the hi-fi. So it'd be past my bedtime, I'm upstairs in bed and he's downstairs and playing these records, and I know we're talking about slow movements here, but there was a fast movement down the stairs in my onesie, screaming and bawling and begging them to turn it off when this came on one night. There was another piece that really bothered me, and that was the second movement of Tchaikovsky's Serenade for Strings. This one breaks into a strange kind of two-part recitative. All the other harmonies drop out, and there's just these two lines ghosting each other in thirds, and it's so eerie. For some reason, at that time, just lying upstairs in my bed, it reminded me of the wailing of lost souls, and once again, I was making a fast movement down the stairs, asking them to turn it down or maybe even change the record. This is Christ Church Cathedral in Vancouver, where I was a choir boy from 1965 till about 1968, till my voice changed. And I really have to credit the music that we sang and the atmosphere that we sang it in Christ Church Cathedral in the High Anglican Church, with having a powerful influence on my forming musical taste. Now, this piece I'm playing right now is by Ralph Vaughan Williams, and it's a religious, well, we could call it anthem, antiphon, something. And we used to sing this during the communion, which is probably the most sacred part of the Anglican Mass. It's very similar to the Catholic Mass. A lot of the music that we got to sing in that choir was composed by 20th century English composers, and they favor this particular sound. It has an ancient quality about it, even though it's modern and has little piquant edges. So what I'm doing here is really just improvising a little bit on this, let's call it antiphon, O taste and see. And I got to be the soprano soloist in this probably in around 1965, which was quite an honor. I didn't have much of a vibrato, but I could, more or less keep in tune. And, oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to say was, of course, the older choristers who'd experienced this piece before had a name for it. They used to go, "Oh, taste and see, wake up to MJB." And Father Baker, the choir leader, would yell at them, "Shut up, quit that," Just choir boys, what are you gonna do, right? To get a rising shot like this, I needed some machines to help me, and I built Crawley 1. This is Crawley 1, made from a VCR, very powerful motor and gearbox, and a fishing reel. And it pulls a lanyard, and so I can hook this lanyard up to a camera jib or lights or rotating platforms or tracks or different types of things, so that when I'm all by myself down here, I can get a little bit of a camera operator effect. Going back to that epiphany, the Brahms moment, I'm trying to think of other things that were happening in my life at that point, musically and otherwise. I think I was around 15 when I kissed a girl for the first time, and I wrote her name on my window of my bedroom with my finger, and it stayed there for a long time, long after we broke up, after she dumped me. Up until a certain point, you don't have the pianistic capacity to really bring much in the way of emotion out of the piano. You can't reach an octave, you can't fill in, you can't play the repertoire that really has the gratification in it, and it's really more or less a mechanical process. But after a while, you suddenly sort of get into this bigger pond where the emotional content of the music is much more compelling. And this is one piece I was playing around that time, which is the Chopin E-flat Nocturne. And you'll notice, if you know this piece, that I'm doing a fair bit of embellishing. I was learning how to embellish at that time. There was a movement afoot to get me out of my straight-laced classical mold and into something more freewheeling in the jazz world. The guys in my little rock band in grade 8 had transformed themselves into blues players and jazz players and were really tearing it up. And I think it was them that were conspiring to get me to enter the jazz world, because remember in typing class one day there was a piece of paper stuck in my typewriter and it said George Gershwin. I heard the name Gershwin, but I'd never listened to any of his music at that point. So I just kind of looked at it and went, okay, I'm being stalked by somebody who thinks I should listen to Gershwin. And then a few days later, somebody stuffed a piece of paper through our mail slot, and it was a chart for the tune Stella by Starlight. And so I learned from looking at the chart, how to make chord voicings and how to go through the really complex harmonic progression that tune has. And after a while, there were meetings in our living room where there'd be a drummer and a bass player and me and maybe a horn player or two, guitar, and we'd be playing stuff that sounded kind of like this, which has a bit of a early sort of Herbie Hancock feel to it. I also had a jazz buddy when I was in later grades in high school, and he and I used to go into the band room at lunchtime, and all the other kids were in there eating their lunch and hanging out, sit on the piano, and one of us would play the bass line, the other one of us would play the piano part that a piano guy would play in a trio, and then we'd play a chorus, and then we'd switch around really quickly, and the other person would play the bass, and the guy playing the bass would switch and he would do a solo. We kind of competed with each other, but we also supported each other, and I think that was a big deal. He also turned into a really stellar musician and part of the local community, a big contributor as a composer and as a pianist as well. Somewhere around grade 10, heading into the last couple of years of high school, I had these three distinct threads musically going on. The populist, let's call it, the songs on the radio type playing. Jazz, which you had to go and discover records and find things that you liked and learn to play them. And then classical, which was pretty much a routine of going to piano lessons and taking exams and going in festivals and things like that. I think it was in grade 11 or grade 12. There was a lovely little school jazz band, and we got into a recording studio and made a record. And if only I'd known that environment was going to be my home for the next 40 years, I would have been pretty thrilled, I think. And one thing you can definitely say about classical piano playing is it's not cool. I think in certain cultures it might be cool, but in my culture, which was kind of the working class, kind of blue collar culture of Marpole in the 60s, whoa, it was not cool. I remember lying about where I was going if I met somebody and I was going to my piano lesson. And I'm sure that's changed a lot, but One thing that happened in high school, I think I was in grade 11 maybe, I met this guy, Doug, and he was a cool guy. He played a slide guitar, and he read all these really cool books like Sartre and Camus and all this. But he introduced me to something. I remember him saying one day, "You got to come over and listen to Marza Warbringer." I thought, what, Marza Warbringer? Is that a Polish woman? Is she speaking? What's going on? And he said, and then it was like Mars the Warbringer. Mars the Warbringer. And he goes, Holst the planets. You don't know the planets? I went, no. And obviously the planets is one of the pieces that's informed our sense of classical music for the whole last half of the 20th century and on into this one. The language is colorful, opulent, it's tonal, but it's very free. It evokes the feeling of the void and space, beautifully. And I think the main thing that shows up in our sci-fi movies is the opening movement, which is Mars the Warbringer. It has this kind of the Empire's out to get you sort of feel. And I would say to I'm trying to round up people to join me on my little classical lifeboat here. People that, instead of the situation that I've been in my career, which was, hey man, do you remember that Tom Petty album? And you know that second song by Clapton, from the Unplugged? It's like, I had no room. I had no room for that data because my data banks were full of different versions of Sibelius symphonies and all that. Put down a pad, you put down a track, you put down a backstop and another backstop, and then you put down Crawley 2. Crawley 2 is also made from a VCR motor. He automatically reverses when he touches one of those backstops. So you can put a light on him like I've done here, or you can put a camera on him and have that camera run back and forth. Or you can put a lanyard on and have him raise and lower jibs, move lights around, all sorts of cool stuff. Starting in about grade 11 at high school, it became inevitable that I was going to go on to university and major in piano performance. At the end of grade 12, I got a warehouse job for a month, and then I was able to attend a master class with a famous Canadian pianist, at which I was going to play my main piece I was working on at the time, which was the Schumann G minor piano sonata. I'm playing the slow movement of it here. And this would be the first moment out at university that I would kind of strut my stuff in front of all the faculty and kind of give them a sense of who I was, sort of like the combine in the NFL. I came up lame on the day, and I was so nervous during that performance that I literally couldn't hardly play 4 bars in a row without stopping, breaking down, making a mistake, having to start over. It was really one of the most difficult half hours of my young life.
or maybe my whole life. It was horrible. So I called all my friends after that and told them, don't phone me. I'm going to be locking myself away for a month just practicing. So I practiced literally 8 hours, 9 hours a day. My parents, Lord knows how they stood it, but I think they really believed in this mission, to go to university and accomplish something. So anyway, when I finally got to play my entrance exam in front of all those same faculty, and I pulled out the Schumann Sonata and played it as a result of this month-long marathon boot camp type practicing. I played it very well, and I ended up getting a scholarship, and all sorts of good things happened. I went into my first year, new teacher, great year. Except for a couple of physical problems which emerged. I spent the Christmas of my first year with my right wrist in a sling because I had a bad case of tendonitis and I had cysts forming. But somehow I didn't let it get me down. I just went, hey, when this goes away, I'm going to get back at it and have even more fun.
In first year, I discovered this piece. There's an underground library at UBC, which is actually underground. Back then, it was a record library, and you could check out a record and sit down at your little turntable and give it a listen. And one day, I just grabbed Mahler's Second Symphony off the shelf, and it's got a booklet with it. So I opened the booklet to figure out what's going on, and then I put on the symphony and followed it all the way through, and then some singers come in, and it's 5 movements, and the last movement starts with this big loud explosion, and then everything dies down, and I'm reading through the book. It says blood everywhere, and the bird of peace rises above the smoking battlefield, singing its song as the world comes to an end. And then a choir comes in and sings what this Auferstehen is called, which is a song of redemption, an anthem of immortality. These moments in Mahler where everything coalesces and reaches a climax and then just resolves in this magnificent way on the one chord. That's what I would go and line up in the rain to listen to a Mahler symphony for. I mean, a lot of the rest of it can be long. It can be a little I hate to say it, but a little trivial at times. Like, I made up this joke about Mahler going shopping for ingredients for his next symphony. He says, okay, let's see, 6 bird calls, 4 military marches, a few Austrian folk songs, some orgasmic orchestral explosions where everyone plays as loud and fast as they can, and throw in a cuckoo clock or two. There's some truth behind it. But I think in general, those slow movements of Mahler really take me close to the edge of the sublime, and I find them irresistible, and I, in a sense, would happily put up with everything else that goes on to lay in wait for those resolutions that are just orchestrally and harmonically magnificent for me. I'd been in exams, I played in festivals, and sometimes I did pretty well and other times just pretty average. I played the Rhapsody in Blue with the New Westminster Symphony when I was about 16, and I remember playing a really wicked piece by Ravel in a special guest spot with the school band on a trip. So I had sat on a stage at a piano and given concert type performances before, but when I got to university in first year, we had to appear at noon hour recitals playing, 1 or 2 pieces, small little segment, along with other musicians. And I was learning the Beethoven Opus 101 A major sonata, a very bold move on the part of my teacher, because late Beethoven is considered, highly challenging and intellectual, and I was a pretty naive 19-year-old who just wanted to play as many notes as possible all the time. But during the performance, there's a cadenza right at the end of the slow movement. And during that cadenza, it just kind of came into my awareness that every note was ringing out to every set of ears in the hall, and there was this really intense sense of communication. The mood that was being generated by the piece through me felt like it was kind of a unifying force that was pervasive and communicated itself to everybody in the audience. And that was a very seminal moment. I really gravitated towards that, and I went back to that moment a lot in the future, just remembering how quasi-mystical that moment felt.
Mouvement malheureux.
Mouvement malheureux.
Mouvement malheureux.
Mouvement malheureux.
Mouvement malheureux.
Mouvement malheureux. Good. In second year, I did a really stupid thing. I'd had a couple of bouts of tendonitis and cysts, ganglions, whatever you want to call them, in first year, but somehow I managed to get through all my playing, and I won a scholarship, and it was a pretty decent situation. But so I landed up in second year, and I said to myself, I am going to cure this once and for all. I'm going to take this in hand, as it were. So I practiced maybe 3-4 hours a day just with my right hand, and it was a big mistake. I was practicing wrong. You know what? I've never had tendonitis since, but also my right hand has never worked properly since. It kind of comes and goes a little bit, but it's quite an impediment. Obviously, the silver lining in this for me is the fact that I found commercial work. I joined the union that year and got a job in a club. Ran for a few months. I remember I went from babysitting jobs to making 2/3 of what my dad was making. It was very exciting. So I was working in a club 6 nights a week and practicing with my right hand during the day and drinking a lot and, tramping it up with some of the ladies in the school. And it was a weird year. You really shouldn't play favorites. But this combination is definitely my favorite. This is Hocus Focus, which is a remote control focus puller using this handy dandy switch, and the Jib, which is made from a skateboard and an IKEA office chair. Yes, I have too much time on my hands. Yes, I do. I took a drive out to UBC when I was making this and wanted to get some shots and just sort of basically see how it felt. And I gotta say, it's a good energy. It's a nice feeling out there, and walking past all the buildings and different where I had classes and so on, it was kind of pleasant. But when I graduated, I couldn't even drive around Point Grey, Marine Drive without trying to find some other route. It was very traumatic, the last 2 years of school. And so my annus horribilis, I guess, was second year, where this physical problem just seemed to really embed itself. And I had acupuncture. I remember that year my piano teacher's wife was Chinese, and back then acupuncture was very illegal, but there was some guy who'd come over from China, and he was lurking in a little joint off Main Street, and so you went there, and there was sort of a secret handshake and all this. He'd let you in, and then I remember his wife sterilized his needles by putting them in burning cigar stubs that were stuck into sand in flower pots. It just so the whole place was just cigars, smelled like cigars. It was kind of beautiful. But anyway, at the end of second year, the class of 74 had donated a sculpture to the music faculty, and there was this big unveiling. So we all went down and into the lobby, and there was a sheet, over the thing, and we gathered around, and then there was a little speech, and then they whipped the sheet back, and all I could think of when I saw it was, it looks like a KFC drumstick, 3 feet high on a plinth. And my girlfriend at the time, once we realized what it was, it's a muscular, shoulder and sort of head, and then this hand and fingers. She said, boy, if that's his arm, I'd like to see the rest of him. But if there's anything that symbolizes for me, I really noticed that recently, just, I don't know, just the wrist, the way it's positioned, and just how much pain there would be, and also just the struggle in the face. I think the sculptor really, I think it's Vincenzi, he just really wants to give you that notion of struggle. And, if somebody had bent my wrist back like that, my head would have flown right off and landed on the floor somewhere. Strangely enough, making this movie's had a kind of an impact on the thing, because I've noticed playing these slow movements, trying to get the tone to emerge. It's been having some kind of an effect. My hand seems to be loosening up a little bit, and who knows, things could be promising. You never know what might happen when you look back in the past and reflect and maybe recontextualize it. Among my favorite vices are those epic sword and sorcery movies from Hollywood, like Lord of the Rings, or this one, Excalibur, from 1980. These type of movies really wouldn't get off the ground without a particular genre of musical score. And this genre was pretty much invented in 1936 or so by a German composer named Karl Orff. What you're hearing now is by far his most famous composition, the opening of a cantata called Carmina Burana. And lying in the center of this cantata is a special little piece for me, which is called the Introitina. It's a soprano solo. And in this solo, the singer is singing about whether or not she should join the church as a nun, or whether she should follow the worldly path and go with her lover. As my fourth year of university drew to a close, like many other students, I was having to make some choices. Really wanted to pursue classical music somehow, but was unable to get my facility really where it should be. So when the siren song of pop music and a paycheck was too strong to resist, I basically tossed my mortarboard in the air and went off and joined a rock and roll band. And the rest, for me, is my history, which is a guy who loves classical music but who works, and was fortunate enough to really thrive in the pop music industry. Okay, I told you up front I was going to advertise for classical music, trying to round up some converts any way that I can. I'm telling you got to go listen to some of this stuff. If you got a prejudice, it'll disappear in a hurry. You just got to pick the right pieces. Check this out. Claude Debussy, born 1862 and never died actually, because when the pyramids are little heaps of sand, they'll still be playing Debussy. One of his specialties was evoking the feeling of water. And he never did it better than in this particular piece called La Mer, which is like a three-movement symphony to the ocean. Here's my prescription. Download this piece onto your phone, get a good pair of earbuds, and then book a passage on a BC ferry heading over to the island on a really blustery, windy, stormy day. Head out to the rail and put this piece on and listen to it. I guarantee if you're not hooked by the end of the thing, I'll give you your money back. Just give me your address and I'll send a check. You know, there's an inevitable comparison between those big resolutions in music and, you know, the fundamental act of procreation, without which the human race would have ceased to exist. Yeah, there's kind of an anticipation, there's a tension, there's a need for progress to a particular point, and then when that point is reached, there's a satisfying sense of release, for me anyway. One of my favorite resolutions in all of music is in this fabulous piece by Maurice Ravel called Daphnis and Chloe. You often hear it played in concert, but it's actually a ballet. But it's got this lever du jour, and the lever du jour is this moment where the sun rises over this sort of Arcadian, mythic land. And he's got one of the longest build-ups in the history of music to the point of resolution. And I got to say, whenever you see pictures of Mrs. Ravel, she always seems quite happy. And you just wonder, is there a connection? Would there have been a connection? You know, I have to say, I think Ravel's my favorite composer overall. It's a big statement. It's not just because of that, but the harmonic language, it really has a large affinity with jazz, actually. But it also has a bit of a sense of French restraint, I think you could call it, whereas the German music of the 19th century was just sort of bursting at the seams with all this kind of over-the-top expressionism, and Ravel's music kind of reins that in, but it's very evocative, very colorful, and he's my guy. Some of the most soul-searingly beautiful music I've ever experienced has come from two composers, Rachmaninoff and Sibelius. Rachmaninoff is right up there with Ravel for me as one of my favorites. He has a sensual quality in his harmony, incredible virtuosity, which of course, you know, sort of leaves me out of playing most of his stuff on the piano. Sibelius is probably most famous for writing the Finnish national anthem in around 1900. It's called Finlandia. There's some dispute about whether it's the sole national anthem. We think that maybe Finland has two, but it's a gorgeous hymn, and it evokes the majesty, grandeur, and the sort of austerity of the Finnish landscape. So I thought I'd close this out, finish this out as it were, by trying to play Finlandia. I'm going to improvise this. Finlandia, the Finnish national anthem, as though it was part of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto. So we'll see how this goes. And thank you very much for watching.